In this episode of the specialised FSR ground control restoration, we strip and service the frame. In the last episode, we stripped the bike back to its bare components, making some interesting discoveries along the way. Right, let's get started. The first thing we need to do is remove this rear shock. In my opinion, the way the shock is constrained in this frame isn't actually very good. Designs have improved a lot over the last 24 years, and the design of this lower link leaves a lot to be desired, to be honest. But one of the nice things, it is using off-the-shelf bolts, so even if the bolt gets rounded out or really rusty, you could actually replace these. With the shock removed from the frame, you can see how grimy and dirty it is, but there's no visible signs of oil leaking, so I'm hoping to reuse this part. One thing I did notice though is there's a load of marks on the preload collar, so it looks like someone's used some mole grips or big pliers on this at one point in time to try to decrease or increase the spring rate. With the shock removed from the frame, we can now assess the linkage pivots. Unfortunately, there's a high amount of static friction, aka stiction, and there's a slight notchiness to it, so we definitely need to service this whole entire swing arm. So let's get started. I start by removing the chainstay seat stay pivots first. They're just simple nuts and bolts. I then start work on the seat stay to rocker link pivots. This isn't a very good design in my opinion, because both bolts are right hand threaded into a common axle. This means that one was significantly tighter than the other, and also there's a possibility of the axle spinning trying to undo it. It's not a particularly good design. With the bolts removed, I try to remove the seat stays, but something's holding it into the chainstay still. I need to investigate further what this is. On closer inspection, there's very small hollow little through axles on each pivot on the chainstay, so I find an appropriate size tool to push them out of the frame. With those removed, the FSR seat stay link comes away easy. Moving on to the rocker link next, it has a similar pivot design to the seat stays. Eventually the bolts come out and the rocker can be removed. And finally we can move on to the chainstay main pivot. Now I do find this design slightly bizarre. It's an arrangement of pivoting top hats, bushes, and a standard bolt that holds it all together. It's very strange and must be really hard to hold concentric tolerances to. I don't quite know how they managed to do this one myself. And it's not something that really should be repeated in modern designs, that's for sure. With the nut and bolt portion of the design removed, I need to find a way of knocking out that top hat type pivot bearing type thing going on there. Then we can remove the rear swing arm from the bike. There's one bell rim type spacer on the drive side, so look out not to lose this if you're doing a similar type of restoration yourself. And you can see in this shot that the whole thing pivots on these like plastic IGES type bush bearing type things. Moving on to the rear shock, I need to remove the spring so I can operate the damper to see if there's any notchiness or stickiness in its stroke. So the first thing I need to do is gain some leverage and remove the preload collar. I then realised to remove the spring I also have to remove the eyelet bushes as they're too wide for the spring to slip over. After a significant amount of time faffing around trying to remove the bushes, I eventually get them out using a socket to push the bush out from inside. With the spring finally removed, I can try to remove the preload collar. Unfortunately there's a lot of dirt and grit on here, so I had to sort of move it up and down a little to make sure it come off smoothly without causing issues. Now let's have a look at this warning label here. Unfortunately, I don't think this shock is easily serviceable at home. You'll need some special tools. I suspect there's oil and a nitrogen chamber providing the dampening with a floating piston on the inside. With this in mind, I wanted to compress the shock a few times to see how smooth it felt. Fortunately, the damper felt smooth and damped the whole way through its stroke. I don't think this is desperately in need of a service, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean it up and reuse it as it is. To clean bike parts, I like to use warm to hot water and car shampoo. Car shampoo is much superior than washing up liquid, as it contains no salts inside it, so it won't encourage corrosion. One thing to say though is I would avoid the wash and wax type formulas, because you don't need to wax the parts you're trying to degrease, so just get normal plain Jane car shampoo. Give the water a good stir to make it frothy and bubbly. And it's time to clean the parts of my two preferred tools, an old dish brush and a toothbrush. There's no secret to this next part, it's just elbow grease. Also, have a microfiber to hand to help you dry the parts. In the next phase of this video, you're going to be cleaning and polishing the frame to try to remove some of the scratches and try to make this blue colour really pop. We start by using some degreaser such as muck off and a microfiber towel to clean up all the hard to access areas that you can't normally clean when washing a bike outside. With the frame clean, we can now remove the Velcro that was holding on the THG mudguard and clean up any sticky residue using a degreaser and a microfiber towel. When we detail and polish a frame, what we're looking to do is try to remove any of these light wear and tear scratches that get put on the paint and remove luster from the look of the bike. Deep scratches will always need to be painted over. But in areas that have seen wear from zip ties and other things threaten away at the paintwork, we can generally improve the look greatly. The first product we're going to apply is this Autoglim Super Resin Polish. It is a super mild polish that also has fillers built into the formula, so it kind of polishes and waxes at the same time, so you get a double whammy effect. You apply by using a microfiber towel or applicator, moving the product around in small circles if you can. Obviously tubes moving around in small circles isn't particularly easy, but you polish on, leave the haze for a few moments, then polish off. It then needs to be left a few moments to dry off before it can be buffed off with a clean microfiber towel. I always think the results of this first stage were tremendous. The luster of the paintwork is greatly increased just using this one simple step. But I feel that we can improve the look still by using a second round of this super resin polish. the second round, I'm super happy with the way it looks. I had some T-cut to hand if we come across some really strong scratches that I wanted to get out, but generally I'm very happy with the way it's turned out, so I'm not going to use T-cut on this bike. To try and seal in the good looks we've worked hard for, I'm going to be using some of this Turtle Wax Hybrid Solutions ceramic spray. This should create a hydrophobic and protective barrier across the frame, making it harder for dirt to stick, as well as increasing the luster of the frame even more. Again, application is easy. It's spray on and wipe off with a clean microfiber towel. With the main frame done and looking great, it's time to move our attention onto the other components. The rocker here just needs a general spruce up and tidy, not a polish or anything like that. I quite like the satin finish and I don't want to wear off the anodizing. The seat stays and chain stays need to go through the same process of the main frame. I won't bore you again going through the process of how to do it, so I'll show you this little sped up montage of them getting cleaned up, polished and looking great for reassembly. With the seat stay and chain stay looking great, it's now time to finish the final part, which is to reassemble the shock. With all the parts ready, we can now reassemble the frame. I'm going to start by lubing up the main pivot. I add additional lube to the bushes on the swing arm because effectively this is the main pivoting position of the bike. I then offer the swing arm up to the main frame, not forgetting that pesky little spacer. The spacer needs a little tappy tap to sit home correctly. One thing I definitely don't want to happen is the bolts fall out of the suspension system, so I'm applying some medium Loctite to all the bolts. And finally I use a torque wrench to make sure the bolts are accurately tight. The main swing arm now feels significantly smoother than it did previously. I then use a microfiber to mop up any excess grease. Moving on to the main rocker, this was a giant pain in the butt to install in the frame, to be honest. It honestly felt like the holes were slightly misaligned, but with some perseverance I got there. With the rocker installed and torqued down, I remove the excess grease. The chainstay pivot is next. This one wasn't quite so hard. But every pivot on this bike is a bit of hard work, to be honest. They all feel slightly misaligned and 24-year-old bicycle build quality, so it's not the best. These little pivots go through the whole frame and chainstays, they really didn't want to line up. So there's lots of welding and weldments and bits and pieces here to ping and go wrong, so it's no surprise really. It's just not a particularly good design from a structural and engineering point of view. In retrospect, I really should look at getting some new bolts for this bike, because these ones at the chainstays are a bit too rusty for my liking. Fortunately, they're off-the-shelf bolts, so it should be pretty easy. And on to the final point of the suspension system, and to be honest, this was the biggest pain in the butt out of them all. I must have spent a good 25-35 minutes trying to get all the bolts and bushes to align on this one. It was a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. But with perseverance comes results. We now have a low friction rear end that operates very smoothly compared to what it was. The last item to install is the RockShox Deluxe rear shock, and to be honest, this went in much more smoothly than any of the other points on the bike, so this was a doddle. And with that assembled, the frame is ready for some new components to hang off it. Here's some slow-mo beauty shots to show you what we've got to work with. So that's it for this episode of the 1998 Specialized FSR ground control restoration. In the next episode we service these Manitou Pro forks and figure out what horrors are lurking inside. Ugh. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.